This is Anastasia Gores, and welcome to our expert interview series for Pilates Bridge. Today, I'm here with Carolyne Anthony. Carolyne Anthony, I've known her for many years. We've been working together, and she is, in my mind, one of the most influential Pilates experts in terms of women's health and fitness. And she is the author of many books. She's also the creator of the Center for Women's Fitness, which is a website that provides both educational resources for the teachers, fitness professionals, Pilates teachers, and also for the people who want to learn more. So I'm going to let Carolyne introduce herself a little bit before we dive into the topic of today's interview, which is Diastasis Recti recovery. And we're going to be answering your questions today that you submitted and covering this subject in general. But first, Carolyne, I would like to hear a little bit from you about your story and how you started with Pilates and this whole subject.
Oh, how did I start with Pilates? Well, that's actually going back a good 40 years. And so I was introduced to Pilates way back in 1982 when I was a professional dancer in London. Excuse me. And it was such an amazing experience that I kept going back as a client. So my first teacher was Alan Herdman, who's still teaching today. He's well into his 80s. He's an amazing person. But it was such a different experience doing Pilates than just doing my ballet and my jazz, which I was doing at the time. And so I kept going back to Alan as a client for many years. And then I relocated to the US at that time. And so there wasn't any Pilates that I could go to, but I kept it up. I kept it in my own program, the mat work especially. And then, of course, the next big change in my life came about when I started having children. And I started to, there wasn't enough information for what I was going through with my pregnancy and everything that comes with postpartum. And then, my journey through having more children, my postpartum, my menopause, all of those things. I built my courses on, but I've kind of dragged Pilates along for the ride because I truly think it's the most amazing modality, especially for women. You can adjust the spring tension according to women at any time in their lives, whether it's pregnancy, postpartum, or even monthly. We can really design specific programs very readily for women with Pilates. I just think it's amazing. I also do think that we need to be a little bit more forgiving with allowing people to evolve the Pilates method a little bit, because we want to look back at Joseph Pilates and who his client base was. And he didn't have that many women, and the women he did have were dancers or high-end athletes. So the repertoire, it wasn't there for women, for the normal average woman on the street who is just going to go home and look after children and scrub toilets. I always go back to my ballet training and cleaning my house and thinking, well, at least I can do my housework gracefully for all of that ballet training I had. So anyway, long story short, that's my background. And basically, I've developed all these programs on my lived experience, on what I've experienced myself and what I have seen with my clients. And so all of my programs have evolved very organically from the ground up. And I'm very excited about the diastasis, especially because I've been doing this for over 25 years. And now the information is just accelerating because we have so much more research on the fascial system. And that is really key to the problem of diastasis recti.
Thanks, Carolyne. So let's go straight into our topic of diastasis. So most of the people probably listening to this interview right now, they know what it is, or at least have heard about it enough to have some kind of form of understanding. But I would like to ask you just to give us some basic definitions about what is diastasis recti abdominis, why is it happening, and what populations are mostly affected by it?
That's a good question, because if you had asked me that question maybe even 5 years ago, it would have been the same thing. What is diastasis recti. So if you just take the words themselves, diastasis means separation, and recti is the rectus abdominis muscle. So it's a separation of the rectus abdominis. And for so long, all we've been looking at is that muscular gap. You have a gap, you have a DR. But now it's just so interesting to be working with this condition just because of the information that we're getting. So when you are asking me personally, from my experience and my background, I'm going to tell you that through the experience I've had, the actual separation of the rectus abdominal muscles are the end result. So that is everything that's happening through your body over time, all of the dysfunction that's going on through many different systems in your body can then result in that separation of the rectus muscles. So when we're looking at that, we have to then travel backwards into our bodies to try and figure out why that actually happened in the first place. And I think in order to figure out how to fix it, and that's not really a good word, but how we're going to help people with this condition is to then understand that it happens to anybody. For so long, we've been looking at it as a problem that occurs during pregnancy and postpartum. And that's really not true. I know the statistics now, the statistics used to be that 100% of pregnant women will present with a DR at the end of the pregnancy. And that just wasn't true to start off with. And now I think they've brought that number down to 60%. But in my mind, that's not a good representation of pregnant women, because I've been teaching pregnant women for over 30 years. And it hasn't been until the last few years that I've been regularly seeing pregnant women with DR. So there has to be something else going on, because if I had been teaching pregnant women 15, 20 years ago, and we never saw a DR, then something else is happening in today's world that is creating the environment for a diastasis to happen.
Do you have any ideas or theories why you're seeing that more?
I do, and it's all going in the book I'm writing with my colleague Sneha Krishna. We are actually writing a book all about this and looking at it from the fascial system. There's a lot more that we need to be looking at when you have not, there's so much you can do to prevent it. And then there's so much more now that we can do to actually heal it. And we're looking at breath patterns, we're looking at posture, we're looking at over-recruitment of muscles, we're looking at incorrect ways of moving. I'm always going to be looking at it from the angle of a movement professional, because that's what I am. But there's so much that goes into creating an environment for a DR to happen. We're looking at stress levels, we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at fatigue. So there's a lot more that goes towards it, just from, not just from, oh, I did 20 crunches and caused a diastasis. That's just simply not true.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely. It'd be very interesting to read your book when it comes out.
I hope so.
So obviously, just for the sake of this interview, from my experience as a Pilates teacher and a lot of the questions that were received, most people think about this condition in postpartum clients. So it's whether it's for women coming in after having a child and they just can't get back into their pre-pregnancy shape. They have like their, mommy tummy, right? So for a lot of them, it's pure aesthetics. They just don't like how they look and they can't do anything about it. And obviously there's a lot more going on where it can cause a lot of other conditions that kind of roll with it, right? Like come along. So talking about this postpartum clients and why is diastasis recti important to deal with outside of just the pure aesthetics? Oh, I don't like how my stomach looks. What are some of the other complications that it can cause?
Well, if we look at a diastasis recti not from the purely muscular, but go back into the fascial system, we're going into the respiratory system, then there's obviously a dysfunction that is causing the diastasis to happen. So if you're not going to address these other issues, then over time, not just having a gap, you're going to have other problems. And more often than not, those problems are going to be with your breath and also with your pelvic floor. Those are the two closest areas that are going to be affected. And then again, if you go, you let this go and you go back to, say, for instance, you're a postpartum woman who wants to go back into running. If you don't address the reason why you have a DR in the beginning, and you go back to something as high impact and intense as running, you're just going to exacerbate all of those problems. And some of those problems can be SI joint problems, lumbar problems. We can come down into the legs. It's such a body-wide condition. And for what's happening now in the DR world is, if you're only going to fix the muscles in the anterior abdominal wall, then basically all you're doing is just putting a band-aid over the problem. And that band-aid obviously is going to fall off over time. With postpartum women, sometimes they can get the diastasis from the birthing process itself. And it's important to address it, I think, postpartum, because the rest of the body is already naturally, I'm not going to use the word unstable, it's a little bit more open and supple. Chances of injuring yourself are higher during postpartum just because of the hormones and stuff. Plus the fact that I think postpartum women are so acutely aware of their body. And, if something doesn't look right, they're going to ask. At least that is my experience in today's world. It's like, why does my tummy look like this? But we also don't want to dismiss the emotional attachment to something that doesn't look great, okay? Because as we're finding out with research now, the superficial fascial system is where a lot of the emotions are. And if you're feeling over emotional about your body, then you're preventing optimal recovery of that area. So we don't want to, again, it's like a whole body solution to the problem. And postpartum women are women who are really keen, the population are very, very keen to get to address these problems.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of emotions going on with the lack of sleep and being tired and everything else, taking care of the whole world,
That's right. I can hear you there. Experience.
Yeah, you have just had like 2 grandbabies in the past 6 months, right?
Actually, April, I had 2 granddaughters a week apart. So yes, it's been
So you started talking about fascia, and I know, knowing from your courses that anybody is able to take online or live in person with you, but you pay a lot of attention to fascia, and this is actually the prerequisite courses, the prerequisite training for a lot of those certifications in deeper courses, deeper modules that you offer. So can you speak a little bit more about the connection of fascia and diastasis and like the process of recovery, or how does it all connect?
How does it all connect? That's a $64 million question, and I'm probably not the best person because I feel like I'm still a student in all of this fascial stuff, but it's so exciting and it's so interesting. But if we're specific with DR, then before I started learning more about the fascial world, I was already seeing changes in a body through some of the what I would call myofascial releases that I had actually developed. And I use again, there's a word now that I use. I use these balls for my myofascial release, especially through the pelvic floor. But now I'm understanding that what I'm doing is actually using my extraceptive stimuli to create interoceptive sapience. And basically what that means, back in the day before we knew these words, I'm using the stimulus of the ball to what I call release any restrictions in the pelvic floor or wherever we're doing it. So what I was seeing back before I understood what all this fascial stuff was going on was that if I started with sitting on the ball to do pelvic floor release, and of course when I I'm teaching women, and for me, my whole philosophy is let's start at the pelvis and move outwards, because for women, that really is the key, not just to our physical bodies, but to our emotions and our mental health. Everything is attached to the pelvis. I'm probably going off on a tangent here. But if we're looking at the fascial system itself, it's like everything is connected by fascia. Your cells, your muscle fibers, your muscles, your organs, everything has some kind of a fascial covering to it. And I'm looking at your fishing net on the wall, and there you have a fascial web right behind you, right? So for instance, if we go to just postpartum women, just for the sake of talking, and if that postpartum client has had a C-section, then in her healing process, which is a normal process, she's going to build up more scar tissue. That's the fascia getting thicker where the incision is. Now, through a whole complex interaction, your body is going to automatically build that scar tissue as a healing process. But then what should normally happen is that over time, that will dissipate. Or, if your body's in homeostasis, if it's in good balance, then over time, the scar will lessen and the fascia will be pliable. But as we know, most of us nowadays, with the lives that we're living, we're under a lot of stress, we're super vigilant. That kicks in our central nervous system. This is all tied in with your fascia. And so for a lot of us now, if we're just looking at the postpartum woman who's had that C-section, that scar tissue tends to stay and sometimes can build up. And then what happens there is that it starts to pull on the fascial system. So now you've got all of these different pulls. And of course, if we understand that everything is surrounded by various different layers of fascia, and you've got to pull somewhere on that fascial web, then it's going to start pulling somewhere else. Okay, so it's not isolated to your scar. So now you've got something pulling on your body. Then if you're going to go back into your regular exercise program, for instance, and you're doing a lot of crunches or running, and your fascial system is now being restricted and it's pulling on your muscles, then you're going to start working out with this unbalanced muscular system. So then over time, again, this is the creation of an environment that may or may not end in a DR. But as I'm experiencing now, it's more and more often that's what's happening, right? So it's that what's happening behind the scenes. So my whole philosophy about this is, let's first look at where these restrictions might be. And of course, we don't know where they are. We can't get inside the body and say, oh, look, over on the left shoulder, there's a pulling of your fascial system. So you have to start somewhere. So I always start with the pelvis. I mean, if you've had a baby out through your pelvis, or either way, vaginally or through a C-section, let's just start there. And then whatever you so-called release, which isn't actually a release, but it's a sensitization of that area. You have that feeling of, oh my God, I released something, but really what it is, it's becoming more aware of that area. So all of that has a domino effect through your body, right? So once you feel that opening or releasing from the stimuli that we're giving you, which is the ball, then it's going to move up through your body, and then it will stop at the restriction. Again, you won't know where that is, but you'll feel stuck. So then we'll get more and more, we'll do different sequences with the fascial release, and then we'll eventually get to a point where there is most of the restriction, and it could be really far away from your scalp. So we're not coming straight into the point of, oh, we've got to get rid of the scar tissue. We're just trying to find out what's going on in the body. And it's the same with the gap that we're always trying to close. It's really not about the gap. It's about, again, I keep saying, what's going on behind. But once you start releasing through the fascial system, then it will kind of let go of the hold it has on the muscles that might be out of balance. And so when you've done that, then you can start to realign the body by using exercises that you're used to have the thought process of, okay, now I'm going to realign the body. I'm going to use this exercise. And what are some of those exercises? are just very simple, basic exercises like pelvic tilts, doing your bridging, anything that's going to try and get everything back into the midline.
So really, from how I'm understanding this, it's really the beginning of this recovery. It's really, even for, if we're talking about the Pilates program, it's really not your traditional Pilates exercises. It's just going like way, like to the pre-basic work of that release, like pre-Pilates.
Yes, and you're absolutely, yes. And the way I see it now with the client base that I'm seeing, and I'm pretty sure your audience also sees this, is like everybody is overworking, right? So my feeling is that we've got ourselves to such a position now that we have completely lost touch with how our bodies feel, how they really work. We're just marching to this beat of somebody else's drum, and it's really taking us away from that mindfulness that Pilates is all about. And so, yes, you're correct in, okay, now how are we going to recover? We've got to take it right back to the beginning. Let's make some new neural pathways that we're going to have to re-educate you on how your body is actually working, your individual body, not that generalized body. We've got to give the responsibility back to the client to figure out what they're feeling. And it's when we switch that around, and when we stopped talking to the client and being the authority and handed that back to the client to tell us how they felt, that's when we started seeing a real big change in the restoration of their bodies. So yes, you're right. Got to take it back. Got to start again with a new mindset, because the old stuff's not working.
Yeah, old stuff is what got you where you are, right? A lot of times.
Absolutely.
So, and I know probably the answer to this question might be kind of hard, but because everybody's different, but like this type of fascial release or realigning work, from your experience of working with the clients, how long does it usually take to start seeing that change, that you went back enough to where it's time to restore, when it's time to kind of building back up, rewound back enough?
I know exactly what you're saying. And you're absolutely right to say, of course, it depends on the individual. But the good thing about myofascial release is you can see and feel the change immediately. But that's not a permanent change, okay? But it's very, very encouraging to the client to be able to feel that immediately, because then it encourages them to move forward. So fascia and realigning your body is going to take time, especially for fascia. To change fascia structurally could take almost a year. So we've got to keep that client engaged enough, to see these changes enough for them to keep it going. And then the client is responsible for being consistent. And of course, now I've forgotten your actual question. So
yeah, what's the timeline? How long do you have to stay with just that release, focus on the fascia before you move on to the actual exercise program of sorts?
Well, the realignment process in our program actually includes exercises. So you feel like you're actually doing something. But, the restoration. So as you progress through, we divide this program, and I can speak in complete sentences, just give me a minute. We've divided this program into fundamentals, and then progressing, and then, into loading and restoration. So you have to watch your client. So I have a whole system of fundamental exercises that includes myofascial release, and then you do an exercise, then you do another release, then you do the same exercise to see what the connection is. And there comes a point, and so you keep giving them these fundamental exercises, but there comes a point where you'll take them to the next step, and you'll see everything regress. You'll see the gap open a little bit, you'll see the skin crinkle, then you know that you have to take it back and keep it to a certain level until their body is ready. So it's not, I can't say to you, oh, we're going to do this for 12 weeks and then we're going to move it on to this. It's really up to the client what their fascial system is like, because we have people with Ehlers-Danlos, hypermobility. So everybody, like you said, is different. But there's a slow progression. And of course, again, it's entirely up to the client whether they are consistent. And it's not whether they're doing the exercises. They can't do the exercise 1 week and then 3 weeks later do another batch. It has to be consistent. Every week they're doing something, because then that will encourage that permanent change within the body. We're building the neural pathways that are re-educating you on how to move.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question, this is like an exact question that I received from one of the readers, and again, might be hard to answer exactly directly, but the question is, what exercises are good for DR that are in the scope of practice of a Pilates teacher? And with everything that we just talked about, obviously, you know, I don't know if you can give like a direct answer to this, but we understand that first we need to start with that fascia. But as far as the scope of the Pilates teacher, what are some of the good, safe exercises that they can teach?
That's actually a really good question, because in actual fact, there are no bad exercises. Everything you do in your Pilates repertoire will help. It's just the way you do it. So that's what we're trying to get people to relearn. If you're doing everything, and Pilates is supposed to be mindful, but we all know where it's heading with, you know, all the marketing and everybody's boom, boom, boom. You've got to bring it back to a mindful practice. Because that's building your interoceptive sapience, that's building your awareness of your body. And that is what we're finding out is key to the rehabilitation of something like DR. So you can take your client with diastasis recti through your whole Pilates program with absolutely no problem at all. Can she do crunches? Probably. Again, you have to know how to connect correctly so that you're connecting both the anterior, posterior, and lateral abdominal wall at one and the same time to be able to execute the exercise safely. But no exercise in and of itself is unsafe. So everyone who's a Pilates teacher who's listening to this interview, you're fine to do what you're doing right now. You don't really ever want to take something out of somebody's program, because then you're also adding to this function. If you take away flexion of the torso, you're taking away part of the function, the normal functioning of your body. So that's not addressing anything. So don't be scared, just slow it down, be mindful, use the correct breathing techniques, do some myofascial release, and understand that any movement is going to move your fascia, right? You don't have to have specific fascial releases. I know I do, and my fascial program is actually has evolved out of the other exercises that I've been doing. So understand that you probably have everything at your fingertips. You just have to know how to use all of these tools. So don't be scared. Just pay attention. Work with your client, and between the two of you, you'll be fine.
So what would you say, out of just our traditional classical Pilates repertoire, what are some of the exercises that are probably the easiest to cue to this population, that like they're almost guaranteed to succeed in doing this specific exercise successfully, effectively?
Just on the mat or the equipment? Anything?
No, doesn't, just anything that, we can do mat or, any of the things that most people are familiar with.
Well, let's take, for instance, let's do something. I'm now all of these exercises in my head. Okay, let's take feet and straps, for instance, right? There's nothing that you would take out of that. You can play around with breathing, for instance. So when we're talking about diastasis recti, we're also talking about the pelvic floor, and we're also talking about the breath patterns, the diaphragms in the body and everything. So, if you're like in the classical repertoire, I believe, because I've forgotten now, it's been 40 years since I've done classical repertoire. I believe there's set breathing now and a set way of doing exercises. And I think that's more of the problem than the exercise it is. It's like not giving anybody any leeway to play with it according to the client's body. So we're going to do feet in straps, and we're going to exhale to lower both legs down and then inhale to come back up. Then there's certain cues that you want to give the client to make sure that the connection through the core is subtle and gentle and not bracing. So bracing the abdominals when you have a condition like DR is detrimental to it. So what you want to do in this instance is do your normal inhale. Don't do an exaggerated inhale, because a client with a DR doesn't have the ability to then connect if you've inhaled too deeply. So if you're doing something like diaphragmatic breathing and you're breathing into the abdominals, which are now dysfunctional, chances are that they won't then be able to gather everything back, because they've lost the fascial connection through there. The fascial connection is loose. It's not going to rebound. It's not going to recoil. So for someone with a DR doing feet in straps, I would then take the breath into, they're lying on the reformer. I take the breath into the back body, into the back of the rib cage, so that they're not displacing anything in the abdominals. And then on the exhale, we're going to connect through the pelvic floor, through the abs, before you lower the legs. Okay, so you're doing the movement not at the beginning of the exhale, because if you did that, then you're connecting when you're on an inhale. So you're inhaling and everything's expanded. If you then connect and do the movement at the beginning of the exhale, you're connecting in a bracing position. And that's also going to be detrimental to a DR. So you're going to exhale, let everything come back to rest. And then while you still have some breath, you're going to lower those legs back down to the floor. And then on the inhale into the back body, exhale, connect everything. Towards the end of the exhale, do the movement. Then you're protecting the whole of the abdominal wall, backside and front. And then that gives the body a chance to start to recover and to reconnect deeply. So it's not a totally different program that you've got to learn, a choreographed set of movements and then you go away and you never do that again. It's just about integrating certain protocols into whatever you're doing now.
Yeah, no, I heard about like also one of the myths of DR, obviously like you mentioned, like not being able to do flexion or, planks or anything like that, or like doing any type of rotational twisting moves or anything like that. And, I feel, because this is just a condition that I had to deal with, if you take all of that out, how do you function in the normal life? Like if you don't teach a woman how to rotate correctly, how is she gonna go and grab the toy for her toddler or pick them up or drive and look back? So this is just, really important to teach those principles that you're talking about. So it goes from the inside out and not just the mechanics of an exercise.
Right. Yeah.
So the next question, like you really answered this one. I'm just going to read it out and we can give it a short answer. So the question was, does performing flexion crunches or performing planks during pregnancy cause diastasis recti?
No. A very short answer, no. The thing to pull away from is always trying to blame us. It's not, the woman who's pregnant is not doing anything wrong. Maybe she's in an environment where the instruction is not great. Okay, so I think we always need to take blame away from this poor woman who's doing her best to try and keep healthy and fit during her pregnancy. But no, none of those exercises are wrong during pregnancy. Just have to learn how to do them properly.
Got it. So again, the next one kind of touched on that already, exercises to avoid, and I think we talked about that, and specifically is HIIT training, which can also be like running, HIIT or anything like that, okay for a woman to do if she has a DR?
I would give them some time to recover, or at least get it to a point where she understands the condition, she's able to function with the condition, she understands how to connect. And then, try it out. If you regress, then you stop, you go back to basics, and then you try again, because the aim is to get everybody back to being functional. The other thing about doing things that are high impact and stuff is it actually is good for your fascia. It regenerates fascia. So if you're running on a hard surface, you've got that impact all the time that's helping you regenerate. That doesn't mean to say you have to go and run 11 miles, but maybe you can take it down to a brisk walk to still get that kind of impact. So we don't want to, again, I keep saying this, it's like, don't keep taking things away, because that's how you're going to build dysfunction. You've got to keep it functional all the time. Running, walking, swimming, all of these things are functional things. It shouldn't be that you can't do it. You just have to be aware of, can you do it? And if you can't do it right now, then don't. Allow your body to recover.
Thank you. Do you know, again, from your experience, or have you seen any specific or common mistakes that women or maybe their trainers make in the postpartum period that can prevent or slow down the healing of the diastasis?
I'm not sure if they can slow it down. I think your body is always trying to heal, and understand too that a postpartum woman is always going to have a slight gap. That's normal. That will heal on its own in the early stages of postpartum, say maybe the first 3-4 months, that your body is slowly recuperating, your fascia is beginning to tighten, that gap will probably close on its own. If you start doing too intense exercise, like trying to get your abs back, and we're going to do all these ab exercises too quickly, then you can actually keep that dysfunction happening. Okay, so yes, can an overzealous trainer do more harm than good? Yeah, I do believe that. So the over cueing, trying to get somebody back into optimal posture, trying to get them to connect to their transverses. Every mother out there, and I'm sure most of your readers are mothers, every mother will tell you that they could feel anything in their core for ages, and that's normal. Okay, it's supposed to be that way. And if you're nursing, if you're breastfeeding, your body's going to stay that way for longer than somebody who isn't breastfeeding. So postpartum, you really should have someone who has an idea of the physiology of the postpartum client and progress you appropriately, not give you everything right in the beginning. Let's get that body back. Come on, come on, come on. I mean, I'm just like, gosh, we're never going to learn. Drives me crazy.
Yeah, I think unless you can experience as a woman that in your body, don't really realize what the body is going through after delivery. It's nothing that you could imagine that you can go through. But yeah, like you said, there's no feeling, there's nothing. Everything that worked before, all of a sudden, you lose all connection. It's like, who put me in this wrong body?
That's true. That was my thought. I remember going to a CPR course when my first daughter was 8 weeks old, and I was like, oh, I better go and learn some infant CPR back in the day. So I'm going there, and of course we're having to work with partners, and we got to the point where we're doing the Heimlich maneuver on each other. And this woman, she comes over me and she starts like pushing on my stomach, and her hand is just sinking right down to my spine. She goes, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? I was like, I've just had a baby. But then it really brought it home to me how there was just nothing there, and this is 8 weeks after I had my baby, and I was a professional dancer. And I had nothing. There was like a big, huge gaping hole in my midsection. And it was just, we laughed, but I was just like, my goodness, this is so weird. So yeah, we've got to normalize all of this, and I think we can just help ourselves so much more than than what's out there now with all of these exercises. Yeah.
So is there like, so from my teaching experience, I'll bring that back to that. Sometimes I've seen women come and they're grandmothers now. And they obviously, you can look at them and they have DR, and they had it probably since they had their baby 30, 40 years ago. But it was just that information was not available out there, that maybe they were not even exercising, there are all kinds of stuff. So is there a certain point where it's too late to address this condition?
I think for the most part, no, it's not too late. I think the people who may not ever be able to regain what they lost is if they have some kind of issue with the connective tissue. Again, we're going back into Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility. But for your normal, average, healthy connective tissue, there's absolutely no reason why you can't bring it back. I've worked with women in their 50s, 60s, 70s where, because I'm so zealous now, everybody gets checked for a DR before I even start my exercises. And I'm always saying, oh my goodness, you have a diastasis. And they go, what is that? And then I show them, because we're always taking pictures and everything. And it's amazing how quickly they recover. Once they understand, they were like, oh, I always wondered, I just thought it was a normal part of giving birth, but once they have seen it, they understand it's something they can work with, the results are actually faster than if you're postpartum for other obvious reasons. But yes, it's never too late. It's never too late.
Thank you. So I know we talked a little bit about your courses, and I know on your website you have several different ones, and you have the certifications specifically for the fitness and Pilates professionals. But you also have courses, the prenatal and postnatal courses that are aimed more for the individuals, for just a person, a woman going through pregnancy, getting ready to have a baby, or who's just recovering after delivery. So can you tell us a little bit more about what those courses are, what they're teaching, what are they based on?
What the home
the one that the home base, like for the individuals, like how can they help those individuals, in what way?
So say that again. I'm maybe I'm not sure what you're asking.
So the courses that are aimed more for the individuals, the home-based programs, obviously they don't go as deep into the teaching modules of fascia and everything else. So how are they bringing all of these concepts to the person at home trying to, again, getting ready for delivery or, recovering after having their child?
Well, it just looks like a normal workout, but the idea for me is to connect with the regular person on the street, the pregnant or postpartum woman. You cannot make it complicated, right? So if I'm teaching a teacher, then she's going to understand the why behind what we're doing with the client. But in the client courses, so I have an intro or a home program for a DR client, and then I have a postpartum recovery program, a 10-week postpartum recovery, and then I have like a third trimester half-hour workout. So everything that's in these workouts has a reason why we're doing them, but they're all very, very simple, and that forms the basis of my work. I think, the simpler it is, the more likely your client is going to stick with it. So if you make it very complicated and you talk a lot and you're telling them everything anatomically, they're going to be like, okay, that sounds great, and never do it. So the home programs that I developed are actually part of the teacher training program so that they can see how these concepts are applied to the regular person. So if anybody wanted to just have a look at what those concepts are, then I would suggest, you could try those out to see what it's like. But again, it's the simpler you make the program, the better it will be for your client, because then they're going to, number one, stick to it and understand that all of the exercise I've developed for all these populations are easy to do. It's not complicated stuff, but it's the way you're doing that works.
And I can also say, knowing your programs and those videos, that part of the courses, your courses for the teachers specifically, is that they get to view and learn the exercise, not just the theory, but the actual the exercises, the cueing in that simple and easy to understand fashion from you. And you have like a video library with dozens, I think like hundreds of videos. Well, close to it, but yeah, that's a lot. Yeah,
there's almost 300 videos.
Yeah, hundreds. But yeah, for different, obviously some menopause, some are more prenatal, postnatal, but you know, I think that's really helpful for the teachers just to be able to view those individual exercises and see, okay, how do you cue, for example, feet in straps or footwork or like bridging with maybe a little modification for the postnatal client, or with the use of the ball, right? Use some small props as well, resistance bands and things like that, just to kind of bring it together for the people, for the client. So I think that's super helpful to have all of those resources. So it's not just theory, it's everything in very in a fashion that's really easy to understand and use for the end user and for the teacher. I want to thank you, Carolyne, again for coming here and talking to us about Diastasis Recti. If anybody has any questions about the courses or anything else, where can they find you to ask you questions or, you know, reach you?
Well, my email, which is info@thecenterforwomensfitness.com. I'd be very happy to address anybody's questions. It'd be lovely. It helps me as well when people ask questions. So yeah, so my email would be best. Or on Instagram, it's Carolyne_Anthony on Instagram. They can message me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'll make sure to add all the links to your courses in the resource section of this interview. And also, I would really personally encourage everybody who is listening to this interview to sign up, subscribe to Carolyne's newsletter, because she does put out a lot of great resources there. Like she talks about the upcoming in-person trainings, live trainings, and also whenever, if they have if she's running any promotions on any of the courses or anything like that, you can get a really good discount on those courses as well if you sign up for it. So I would, you know, it's just a really great resource to learn from, and I really hope that everyone who listened to this interview got a lot out of it, and you'll be able to learn and teach your clients successfully and help them recover. Thank you so much, Carolyne.
All right, thank you, Anastasia. I'll see you soon, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.